Welcome to Sea People by Seafoam Studio. I'm Michelle, your host. This is a space for us to explore stories of the sea and the people who steward it. I'm so excited to be kicking off this very first episode. Two guests today are some of the most dedicated and passionate scientists that I know. Very excited for you to meet them, and please enjoy the episode. Thank you. I am joined today by guests Meg and Terry. I had the privilege of diving with both of them in the Philippines several years ago through an Academy Adventures trip, and it was just such a phenomenal experience getting to learn more about each of them and their collective work through years and years of research and partnership with international organizations around coral conservation and nudibranchs. So with that, I would love to hand it over to Meg to introduce herself.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, I'm Meg Burke, and I'm now retired and living in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a little bit far from the ocean. My greatest professional achievements have centered on my career, the 23 years I worked at the California Academy of Sciences, which is in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. One highlight of that career was being the principal investigator on a large multi-million-dollar grant from the National Science Foundation that helped us build the living exhibits in the new academy: the rainforest, the coral reef, the California coast, and the Water is Life exhibit. That grant took me to the Philippines for the first time in 2006, and my ongoing work in the Philippines has been by far my greatest and most rewarding professional achievement. Since 2006, I've traveled regularly to the Philippines, working with Academy colleagues, especially Terry, and also with our Filipino colleagues on coral reef research, education, and conservation. I'm also an avid traveler and photographer, and have had the good fortune to spend time in places like the Galapagos, among the incredible wildlife there, and in Churchill, Manitoba, to see polar bears. And then, just as a little aside, for the last 9 years that I lived in Marin County, every Saturday that I was home, I volunteered at Guide Dogs for the Blind as a dog walker. And it's without a doubt the most rewarding volunteering I've ever done.
Oh, thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Meg and Michelle. I'm Terry Gosliner. I'm a curator of invertebrate zoology and geology at the California Academy of Sciences, where I've worked for over 40 years. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was introduced to marine life via tide pools at a very early age. And I saw my first nudibranch when I was 13 years old and decided that's what I wanted to study for the rest of my life. And so far, so good. It's been a great journey, but nudibranchs have opened up a world of diversity to me and been the vehicle that I've used to study the process of evolution, and also a vehicle for understanding marine conservation. And that has led me to my work in the Philippines, which began in 1992. And that really codified the fact that that part of the world, the Verde Island Passage of the Philippines, constitutes the richest marine environments anywhere that we know of on this planet. And with that came the responsibility of protecting that area and working very closely with lots of partners in the Philippines to really ensure livelihoods for coming generations while simultaneously protecting those resources. And those things have worked hand in hand very well together to increase the visibility of this area and increase its protection. And there are not many places where you can say that the reefs that you're diving on today are better than they were when you first started exploring those areas more than 30 years ago. And that is, in fact, one of the most hopeful signs that I can think of about the future of the oceans and the future of coral reefs is things are getting better in many respects.
Yes, that is, I think, the hope that we all need to hear, given how things are portrayed in the media sometimes. So I'm so glad the collective work that you both have done is, sowing seeds and reaping the benefits, right, for us all and all these coastal communities that heavily rely on coral reefs. So thank you for sharing both your professional and personal, and as you were saying, Terry, just you've done good things with nudibranchs. Terry is so humble. He has published books and made all these discoveries, and that can take up a whole episode. So I'm not going to spoil that part just yet. So moving on to the topics of today, and the question that I ask all of our guests is, maybe starting with Meg, what is your first memory of the ocean?
That's a great question. And I've thought about that. And I think the first real memory that I truly have, as opposed to hearing things from my parents or something like that, was at the Fort Lauderdale beach in Florida, because I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. And so when I was probably 5 years old, we would go to the beach for picnic suppers. And so I think that's the first time I really experienced the ocean. It was back when I was 5.
Critical age where lots of those
Yes.
core memories are built. Yeah. How about you, Terry?
Well, I have a very early memory. In fact, I think it's probably one of the things that is one of my earliest memories of my childhood that is genuinely my own rather than hearing stories from my parents. That I was about 4 years old, and I remember walking along the beach in Carmel, California, and just um, enjoying the beauty of the ocean, the white sand, the wind blowing on my hair, which was blonde in those days. and and it was just really one of my earliest memories of anything I can remember, and it really struck me that that earliest memory of the ocean really has been with me my entire life.
Yeah. There's always some core memory that we make related to the ocean that just is a driving force, right? And a running theme that, amongst ocean lovers, really motivates us to care. And on that note, I'd like to shift gears to science, because we are, I hope I'm able to say this, but all scientists here. My background is in environmental sciences in my undergrad career, but both of you are marine scientists. And Meg, starting with you, I'd love to hear more about what you think science's importance is relative to the oceans.
That's a great question, Michelle. And I think the ocean is so awe-inspiring. A lot of people only, even if they haven't seen it personally, they've seen it in movies and things like that. And I think that if you don't address the science that's related to the ocean, you run a risk of missing out a lot and assuming, for example, that the ocean is limitless and we can do anything we want to it and it's so big it won't matter. So I think science is really important in terms of understanding the ocean and all its varieties as these different ecosystems, and also understanding all the life that is in the ocean. So the ocean can be enjoyed at a strictly visceral level, but if we want to protect the oceans and help them survive all the insults that are being thrown at them, there's got to be science behind it.
Absolutely. And even if one doesn't come from a science background, how might we connect non-scientists to the process of science? And I'll throw that to you, Terry.
Well, I firmly believe that we are all scientists at heart, and that we are making observations of the world around us every moment that we are breathing and walking around the environment. We notice changes in the weather. We notice changes in the season. We notice flowers blooming. We notice birds and butterflies flying around our yards. We are, in essence, observers of the world, which is the foundation of science. And it's that natural history background that we all have a propensity to undertake and value, that provides the body of knowledge that helps us better understand how the world functions, how humans and other organisms that we share the planet with are interfacing with each other. And that in turn provides us with guidance of how to better become stewards of that environment in a more sustainable way. And I think a lot of that is really intuitive in human nature, and um, it's formalized through academic training, but it's ingrained in our being, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that reframe. Everyone can be a scientist. I know that with like the walled gardens of academia, it might seem like a little bit daunting with the peer review process, but like you said, like everyone is making observations. As long as you approach things with curiosity and you're documenting changes over time, really, you're a scientist because that
You
is what
are.
it's all about.
Yeah, I would add that to me, scientists are people who haven't lost that childlike wonder. They're always, as a child, think of the questions you get asked by children. Why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? And scientists just never outgrow that. They look at the natural world and they wonder, why is it like that? What type of organisms are there? So I agree completely with Terry that we're all scientists, and some of us just formalize it a little more than others.
Yes. And with the work that scientists and non-scientists do alike, I'm wondering with the work that you've done, how does one translate the passion that one has for the ocean into action? And I will let you both speak to all of the research with folks who are local to international communities in the Philippines, to things happening at the Cal Academy. I'd say choose your own adventure here, but love to hear how someone can take what they know and what they love and act on it.
Okay, I'll start. um, I think that everybody can do things that will either help the oceans or hurt the oceans. And that is one of the messages that certainly Terry and I have tried to reinforce in the Philippines. And I have done that every place else where I've given talks about our work in the Philippines. And by tangible actions, eventually everything we do impacts the ocean, because whatever we do on land is likely to eventually, whether it's pollution coming from a factory or pollution just going into the air, that's all going to eventually impact the ocean. And so by stopping and thinking about the impacts you're having in your daily life, even I lived in North Dakota for 18 years and couldn't be further from an ocean if I tried. But what people do in North Dakota impacts the ocean. Even something as simple as just being a wise consumer and trying to minimize the amount of waste that's being produced, making sure you're not buying an endangered species or species whose populations are really threatened. I think that that is a way to connect people who might think, well, I live in Colorado or I live in North Dakota, and so I really don't have any connection to the ocean. I think that's a way to help connect them. And maybe I'll let Terry talk about some of the tangible action things you can do when you do live by the oceans.
Sure. I think one of the things that's really important in sort of unlocking a call to action is understanding who the person you're talking to is and their experience and where they're coming from, and really taking the time to listen um, to that person's experience so that you can see what are the challenges they're facing with maybe, wrestling with how to feed their family as a subsistence fisherman in the Philippines versus, you know, enforcing a marine protected area. And so all of us as humans have the same fundamental needs and the same fundamental desires. We want our families to thrive. We want the coming generations to be successful and at least have the same or better livelihoods than we have. And so understanding what those challenges are the I think the provide the pathways for how to have discussions about the ocean and what we really care about and how we can protect it. And we have to balance as humans utilizing resources with protecting the environment. That's just the nature of everything we do because we so rely on the natural world and the riches of mineral wealth and all of those things to have the livelihoods and lifestyles that we all aspire to. And so trying to understand where that person may be coming from in terms of their individual experience, I think is the sort of gateway to having a meaningful discussion about how we can better utilize resources and secure that future for our grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Yeah, I love that. There's something to meeting people where they are, right? And as much as scientists and as researchers, we want to espouse, the knowledge and everything that we know, and either the right or the projections, and really some of that can be either too ahead of what they're able to do now, or reaching back into history to see what's been done in the past. But a lot of times it is looking at the present day current state of things and what is feasible with the resources and information that folks have at hand to make it seem less daunting, right? That's really key. And yeah, I see that in the work that both of you do. And like, even as an individual, I'm like, it's easy to fall into I don't know, the state of like eco anxiety, which is something that folks have been, especially with my peers, have been thinking like, oh, what is me as an individual? How can I change anything about warming oceans and climate change? But really, it's in small things, and it is in collective action and awareness. I think it definitely does start with that, and feeling a sense of agency, despite the kind of world maybe telling us that we don't have it. So I really, really appreciate that. And then in, I guess, recent events, Terry, you just came back from San Diego. Tell us what you have been up to.
Okay. Well, one of the things that is happening in the state of California is that the state legislature decided that we really need to know more about the marine life that is found along the California coast. And surprisingly, we're discovering new things about how many species are present in our tide pools along the California coast. And we used to think that there was most typically a single species that was found from, say, the Mexican border all the way up to British Columbia. And that when we start looking at the genetics of those species, we find there may be somewhere between 2 and 5 species. And that's really interesting academically, but why is it important to people's lives? Well, if you think that we've designated marine protected areas based on that fundamental understanding that we have species that are widely distributed. So are the existing marine protected areas matched with that new understanding that we're gaining about marine life in California? And it turns out we don't know how many species there are, but there is likely to be 3 to 5 times the number of species that we once thought up until a couple years ago were what made up the marine life of California. And so we're out there collecting specimens from across the state to do their genetic sequencing and then compare those with what we can recognize as distinct species and how to recognize them, and then see whether the existing network of marine protected areas actually provides the best levels of protection for that new understanding of the diversity of California's marine life.
Ooh, that is such an amazing effort. I wonder if is it like the correlation versus causation kind of question, right? With the, marine protected areas,
Yeah.
And the increase or decrease changes in biodiversity, I suppose. How are you going about the collection process? What tools are you using?
So one of the things that we had 45 people, all experts in different aspects of marine life and different taxonomic groups of organisms, and people who are experienced in looking for particular groups of organisms that inhabit tide pools, and using their collective expertise to really launch this first of 6 bioblitzes across the state to really piece together this growing and changing view of the marine richness of our own coastal waters here in California. And so everybody's going out there and collecting specimens. We then preserve those specimens to basically serve as voucher specimens for future study. And then we sequence take every sample that we take and sequence its DNA to see how much diversity and how many different species and what their distribution patterns are going to really reflect with that new intensive sampling effort. And, I think this is really a creative understanding of people in California providing some leadership in understanding the importance of biodiversity to the well-being and future of the state. And we think of all of the other things that are present here in California, of AI, of the tech world, and yet, the fact that there's still an incredible foundation in our understanding of biodiversity is really important. The state has also recently funded some terrestrial efforts where they're barcoding the insects of California to get a much better understanding of what's going on in the terrestrial environment. And so as we think we know so much about this natural world, we now realize that our understanding is far from complete, and that even some of the fundamental precepts of our baseline understanding of biodiversity is still in its infancy. And that's one of the reasons we need to mobilize ordinary people who reside in California and the rest of the world to be observers and to record changes in distribution patterns that we see. And there's a lot of different things that everyone can contribute to building that new understanding of the knowledge of the biodiversity on our planet.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think anyone can pick up their devices and or notebooks and go out and document anything they can see. And that's citizen science, right? That is in contributing
Exactly.
to a library of shared observations. Meg, yes, you had something.
I was going to say a couple of things. The importance of citizen science, because there just aren't enough scientists. And you don't have to be formally trained to go out, as you said, with your phone and take pictures of what you're seeing. I think that also it's important to do this not only to establish, as Terry was saying, a baseline of what's out there that's a much more comprehensive and complete baseline than what we currently have, but it's going to keep constantly changing. The natural world doesn't stand still. And we know that the oceans are warming, and with that, species are changing their ranges, where they are found. And so it's really important to be able to track these changes as much as possible. And again, there just aren't enough scientists to be able to do all that. So the more that citizen science can come in, the more that non-scientists get out there and document what they're seeing, the better.
Yes. The world doesn't stand still, and neither should we. That's a little plug for making moves. All right. So, as we know, the Earth is 70% oceans. And Tara, you were touching upon funding. California is doing some great work funding terrestrial and marine conservation efforts. I am curious. We can probably, again, dedicate another whole episode on funding. Maybe this is like a little sneak peek. Maybe if you can, or both of you can elaborate on, how does funding play a role in all of these efforts? Just the tip of the iceberg for that one.
It's a big iceberg. But funding is critically important, from covering the expenses of things like travel, if you're not doing the research and the documentation literally right outside your back door, but the supplies, the genetic analysis that Terry was talking about that's being done with the specimens that have been collected, all of that, none of it's free. All of it costs money. And so being able to have funding, and I would say what's critically important is consistent funding. So you can get a one-off grant, a one-off donor to support one expedition or one BioBlitz, but what we need are steady, consistent documentation efforts, and that requires steady, consistent funding as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that is particularly challenging in the global environment in which we find ourselves right now is that funding of science is declining, certainly in the U.S. And one of the things that we seem to forget is that we fund scientists mostly in the U.S. through the National Institutes of Health and from the National Science Foundation. And the support for that fundamental science is diminished in the current political climate. A lot of the work that Meg and I did in the Philippines with our community partners was funded by USAID, which was abruptly terminated. That work those gaps have to be filled, or that work doesn't get done. And when you think of the number of lives that USAID funding saved around the world, and how many people haven't survived because of the termination of that funding, it's really tragic. And so it's not just advancing knowledge, it's keeping people surviving in the rigors of today's world against diseases. And unless we understand all of those things in terms of human health, but also in terms of how we relate to other organisms that we share the planet with, we're basically tying one or both hands behind our backs about our ability to be a resilient species to survive. And we're impinging on our own survival by not funding science and not funding human health around the world. And, we're going to be exposed to diseases because we're not figuring out how to deal with them when they first develop. And you look at all, things like Ebola, which if they made their way to the U.S. in a widespread fashion, it could be absolutely devastating. And we tend to think very short term, and we need a big long-term picture about human health, the environment, and our survivability on this planet. Really relies on all of those things. So it's not just a luxury item that benefits scientists. It benefits society, and it also means that we as a species are likely to survive longer.
Yes. With funding and the lack of funding, I think people are slowly awakening to the fact that while it may seem that they're going to these very specific efforts, they are going to so many others that are only now being, kind of daylighted to the public. And they had served so many things. And I remember learning some time ago that coral reefs provide so many ecosystem benefits. They might be the key to future pharmaceuticals or longevity, let alone food and sustenance for coastal communities. So more funding, more efforts, and resourcing towards the things that are keeping us alive is critical. So I think that is a huge takeaway for me. And on that, I know that this conversation, again, we could go so many different ways, and that's why there's time set aside for more of this, as a heads up for listeners and viewers. But as we come to a close, I like to ask this question of all our guests is, and you probably have already touched upon it in one way or another, but what is one message you would tell your younger self and the audience about the ocean and everything that you now know?
Okay, just one message. I would say that the ocean is even more magical and astounding than you think it is right now, and it's also more vulnerable than you think it is. And so it really is worth getting to know it as deeply as possible and working to protect it as much as possible.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing about the ocean is that's where life began on this planet. Most of the groups of organisms that, including mammals, got their start in the ocean. And it's where really the cauldron of evolution really shaped the diversification of life on our Earth. And it, as you and I've talked before, Michelle, that the ocean is 70% of our planet, but it gets a small fraction of our attention compared to other parts of our planet. And if we paid attention proportionately, the ocean would receive the bulk of our attention and efforts of conservation. And it is somehow neglected because a lot of it's very deep and inaccessible to people. And we need to understand it and explore it fully to be able to preserve our existence.
Yes. On the subject of deep, before I ask you both to plug something, there is this beautiful docu-film called, I think, A Life Illuminated, around deep sea exploration and how bioluminescence is exhibited even at thousands of feet under the water. So check that out. But again, thank you both. And if you have a couple of things that are coming up in the pipeline that you would like to plug, here's the opportunity.
Terry, I'll let you go.
All right. Well, I'm just had such a privileged life to be able to go explore oceans around the world, and to me, the thing that I would like to plug is not anything personally, but to plug to people to get their feet wet and taste the salt water, that it will enrich your life. It will build your understanding and your passion and your growing understanding that the oceans and our entire planet need to be protected. And we've never seen the kinds of threats that we are experiencing today in the history of humankind, because we're using our resources. The climate is changing. we're destroying our own world. And the solutions to correcting that are within our grasp. And we just need to really take up that challenge and protect our planet, reverse climate change, and ensure that diversity survives.
And before I give my plug, I would just add on to Terry's that while it's not too late, there's still many, many reasons to be hopeful for reefs and the ocean in general. We don't have forever. We need to act sooner rather than later. We are running out of time to make a difference. But the plug I would make is similar to Terry's. It's not for me personally or something that I have coming up, but rather plugging that everybody should try and become more connected to the ocean, whether they live by an ocean or not. If they live by an ocean and they haven't walked on the beach, as Terry said, and tasted the salt air, they should do that. But even if they're not able to immediately get to a beach, just learning more about the ocean, watching some of those fabulous documentaries that are available on TV, on streaming services. I think the more we understand about something, the more we're going to care about it.
That ties everything together so beautifully, because that is the reason why we're here today. It is to build understanding, and to see is to understand as well. So I really appreciate both of you today. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Terry, for your expertise, your decades of work and dedication to this cause, to make us care about the ocean. It truly is an honor and a privilege for me to be able to have time with you both.
Well, Michelle, thank you for providing the platform for us to be able to reach out to people and spread the word about our own passion and the things that we've learned, and the necessity to really take this seriously. But it's a journey of love and passion that is not onerous. It's a delight to experience the ocean and protect it.
Yes, and I'll just add my thanks to you, Michelle, for organizing all this. And of course, thanks to Terry, who is still pushing the frontiers there.
Yes, the work is never finished. So thank you, and together let's see people as sea people.
All right. Thank you.
All right.